Today, we're going to discuss SpaceX and Elon Musk's failed Starship launch. We're going to talk about the three things that make people very happy. We're also going to address how self-help gurus and self-help seminars fall short of addressing our deepest needs. All that, and one more thought about strengths, weaknesses, and the very thin line that divides them. This is the Clayton Tyner Podcast. Well, we're back. We're keeping it consistent. This is episode 15. My name is Clayton Tyner. I'd love for you to follow me on Twitter or on Instagram. If you're new to the channel, or even if you've been watching for a while, the best thing that you can do to help this channel is to subscribe. I'd love for you to like, I'd love for you to comment, but I need you to subscribe. We are so close to 200 subscribers. I believe that we can pass that up. You know, YouTube is already sporadically running some ads on some of my videos, which was surprising to me because we're still a very small channel. If you're wondering, I see no revenue from those ads. I'm a long way away from monetizing this channel, but with your help, I think that we can grow a great community. What we're trying to do on this podcast is tackle cultural issues through the lens of ancient wisdom. So let's get that subscriber count over 200. Some of you have like 75 Gmail accounts. Just subscribe on all of them. Switch account, subscribe. Is that cheating? Don't know. But let's get that subscriber count up. I'm really excited about the show today. You know, it was tough coming back to the podcast. I thought about it all the time. I was anxious to come back to it. But, you know, I started strong. I got like 13 episode ends. Life went crazy. And I disappeared for basically 2 years. So I'm very, very excited to be back. And that's going to really kind of play in, especially to our first topic. So without further ado, let's get to our 3 points. A lot of people saw last week Elon Musk and his company SpaceX, this audacious attempt to send this rocket into space. It is massive. It's like the size of a skyscraper, 40 stories tall. It's just massive. The images of it are huge. And it launched. It did get off the ground. So it's not technically a failure to launch. It did get off the ground. But within about 4 minutes, it had like completely exploded. And within a couple minutes, it had turned sideways. If you're watching on YouTube, which, you know, I'd love it if you're watching on audio, if sometimes you could make it over and see the video. We're going to show a little bit of video in this YouTube short. They kind of put together a nice compilation here. They're showing the rocket actually going off of the launch pad. Happened at 9:33 a.m. on Thursday. It says 2 minutes after liftoff, a trail of flames poured out of the booster's engine. The rocket then began to spin in midair, right? This is not what you want your rockets to do. The spaceship was stacked on top of the booster and it failed to separate from it. So that was the key problem, is that the boosters that get it up into space and the actual rocket itself didn't split up. And so then you see this huge, massive explosion. And oddly enough, everyone starts to cheer like it is the 4th of July or something like that. The reactions online were very mixed, and partly because Elon Musk has put himself into the fray of political conversation, which is a very, very quick way to have a lot of people really hate you. So a lot of people online were kind of gloating as if this is some massive failure. Of course, this rocket, I don't know how much it cost, millions of dollars, I'm sure. And it's easy to look past the fact that Elon has not only sent all of these rockets into space, and that his company SpaceX is now like the main thing that's being used, even by NASA, even by the federal government, even by other world governments, to get things into orbit, and that he actually built rockets that not only take off, but then come back and land so they can be reused, so he can do it for a fraction of the cost. Like, let's look past all of that and see this one giant Starship blow up and then call it a failure and kind of dance on his grave. And I'm going to suggest that if you're inclined to kind of celebrate the failures of others, that you might be positioning yourself to really have a tough time advancing your own life. One of the things at MetaChurch that we talk a lot about on our staff is being willing to celebrate failure. We just read a great book by Craig Rochelle that talks about leaders who have it, and one of this intangible idea of being able to lead really well and cast vision really well, and a leader that people want to be around, and an organization that people are drawn to. And it's what we're trying to do at MetaChurch, is to have it, right? Like this magnetic thing that pulls people in and wants people to be a part of something, because we're like celebrating what we think is the most important thing in the world, which is the good news of Jesus. And so we want to have it. And one of the things he stressed in there as well is to celebrate your failures. And the people who were maybe a little bit informed understood that this was a test launch, and that really the almost miracle of getting a 40-story building thousands and thousands of feet in the air, just getting it off the ground at all, is such a massive, massive win, that even though, it could have separated and gone further, and that would have been a better use of their money and everything else, they will take the win that they got. Basically, the number one way to guarantee failure in life is just to not try. You have to have a target that you're aiming for, and you have to be willing to go for it. If you want to guarantee failure in your life, just be too afraid to start something. You know, episode 1 of the Clayton Tyner podcast was about starting something new, because I was starting this podcast, and man, I talked about going out and leaving the walled fortress and fighting your dragon and going on the adventure of a lifetime and being courageous and not just sitting at home and putting a plan together and writing it down and executing on it. And, imagine 13 episodes in, when life goes a little bit sideways for me and I have to step away, and I basically don't show back up to the podcast for 2 years. And I still have episode 1 online. That's like, you got to start something and you got to see it through and you got to come to the end. That was, in effect, some form of failure to have started it and been consistent for 13 weeks in a row, and then just to have stepped away for a long time. But I don't see it that way. I always knew I would come back to it. I was nervous to come back to it. But in that step away, I got fresh vision for the podcast. And when I was ready to come back, I already have this camera. It is not the nicest camera. In fact, it's one of the cheapest cameras that will shoot in 720p. I already have the lights. Are they the nicest lights? No. They're like the best 3-star rated lights that you can buy on Amazon for under $50. Like, I've got the stuff though. I've got the microphone. It's not the Shure microphone that your favorite podcaster uses. It's the $20 version of that. But I had this stuff in place because I had started and I had some vision for it. And so I was able, when the time was right and when my life opened up a little bit, to come back to it. And so often we're so afraid of failure, and we're so afraid of what people will think about us. And imagine if Elon Musk was so paralyzed by all the people dancing on the grave of his Starship blowing up in the middle of the air, that he wasn't willing to do anything else with his life. If you read Elon Musk's biography, which I have right over here, what you find out is that he had a lot of failures along the way. And if you look at Tesla's history, like basically every timeline he's ever put out hasn't really happened. There is a great quote as we try to look at some ancient wisdom from Marcus Aurelius. He says, if a thing is humanly possible, consider it within your reach. Like, if it is possible, consider that you might actually be able to do it. Now, this isn't like Oprah, manifest it, name it, and claim it. This is like, be willing to put your tail on the line, to actually go public and declare what you're going after, to put a plan in place and be willing to work harder than anyone else is willing to work to see it happen. I've kind of gotten used to public failures. One of the things that we decided early on, and honestly, I decided before we ever started MetaChurch, is we are going to be bold and we're going to be audacious. And when we outgrew the saloon that we were meeting in on Sunday mornings, we started looking for a new place, and we really thought we had found the place. And it even seemed like there was a lot of providential things that had happened to make it possible. And I got on stage in front of 1,000 some odd people and talked about how we're going to take this place and we're going to charge that mountain and we're going to go after it and we're going to raise funds for it. And when I say it fell apart spectacularly, like a 40-story Starship in midair, it fell apart spectacularly like a 40-story Starship in midair. It was painful. And I had to get back up on that stage after casting vision for a couple of years and let people know that that wasn't going to, in fact, happen. And yet, because we had organized ourselves towards this huge target on the wall, which the target was never that building, the target was expanding. And because we had begun the fundraising process, and because we had gotten our minds around moving, and because we had learned about the real estate market, and because we had met all of these great connections in the community, when the right building opened up, like as soon as the other one fell apart, we were able to go after it and execute, and God moved. And we got a space that we now have, this beautiful 22,000 square foot building for our church community that is so much better than the one that we were actually looking for. You can't be afraid to fail. In the book of Proverbs, which is the book of wisdom in scripture, it says, where there is no vision, the people perish. Where there is no vision, the people perish. And you often hear this verse quoted, even by secular people who are talking about leadership and vision. But often you don't hear the second half of the verse, where there is no vision, the people perish. But happy is he who keeps the law. The number one way to guarantee failure is just to not try. And so, what does it mean to try? Number one, it means to have a big vision, to actually have this massive goal. What author Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great and Great by Choice and How the Mighty Fall, he calls a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. It's this idea where, like, if you shoot for the stars, then maybe you'll get to the moon. But man, the moon is a lot further away than like San Antonio, Texas, right? So you put this giant goal out there, and that's what Elon Musk has done. Elon Musk has said, we are going to send human beings to live on Mars. That's a pretty big, hairy, audacious goal. And he's already said, I'm not going to see that in my lifetime, but I'm going to work towards it. And part of what you understand when you start really reading what he has put together is that everything he does is to that end. That Tesla isn't just about building cars and environmental sustainability, that all the things that are going on in Tesla are all feeding the same dream of getting people to Mars. SpaceX is feeding the dream of getting people to Mars. The Boring Company, where they're putting all these tunnels under the ground, it's feeding the vision of getting people to Mars. Even PayPal, which you may not know, he was on the ground of starting. That all of that is all aiming towards his same ultimate goal. And he has had so many failures along the way, and almost all of them have been public failures. And I really believe that the difference between people who really see success and impact and the people who just kind of navigate through the status quo of life is often the willingness to be humiliated in public failure. And, it's like a lot of people stay single for this reason, or they settle in their relationships for this reason, because the moment that you like publicly address, the moment I told my homeboys that I was going after Katie to be my wife, this unbelievable, beautiful, talented, single mother of two. Like when I was this dreadlock, young guy, touring musician, everyone was like, you're crazy. And I put myself up for public humiliation. And so you got to do that. And I love Proverbs because it starts with that idea. You have to have this big, giant, massive, scary goal where there is no vision, the people perish. But most people stop there. They put their little ellipses, ... and they don't go through the rest of it. The rest of the verse says, but happy is he who keeps the law. Now, Proverbs is written in the Old Testament. Those are the Jewish scriptures. It's written in the context of ancient Israel, where everyone was held to the law, the 613 rules, regulations, and commandments. So what was the law in this scenario? The law was the incremental, actionable steps to accomplish the vision for the life that God laid out for his people. And the vision was big. Like the initial call to Abraham to start the nation of Israel was, I will make you into a great nation. Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. And even more importantly, that he would use this one nation to open the door of blessing to all nations, which we know was finally fulfilled in the person of Jesus. So it's like the savior of the world, God in human flesh, was going to come through the lineage of these great people. But the law was these small, incremental, actionable steps to get them to the big picture. And so you need both of these. And this is part of what this Starship launch was. It was an incremental, actionable step. Let's see if we can get a rocket the size of a 40-story building off the freaking ground. Because if we can do that, then maybe we can get it into orbit. And if we can do that, then maybe we can get it to Mars. It's all these incremental, actionable steps. These can also be called lag goals and lead goals. Like the big goals, the lag goal, the thing that you're actually going for at the end of all of it. And then under that, all of these lead goals, hundreds of lead goals, all the boxes to check, where if you do all of those, then you get to this. And a lot of times people have one or the other. A lot of people are like box checking people. And so they'll lay out 30 things they have to do every single day, but it's not, none of it is pointing towards one like orienting principle of a giant goal. And other people are big dreamers, right? But big dreamers often have personalities that push them away from actually taking the actionable steps. And so they dream about having this incredible life and this big vision, this big picture, but they never have any of the lead goals that would actually get them there. And so their dream always stays a dream. And other people, they're taking all of the right steps, but their steps aren't unified in the direction that they're taking their life. You need both of those. And you can't treat a failed lead goal like your rocket blowing up midair as a failed lag goal, like the whole vision is done and you're a complete failure. In fact, oftentimes you have to lose quite a few battles in order to win the war. And if you're not willing to fight those battles and fight them publicly and fight for your vision and work harder than anyone else and put yourself out there, then you're probably going to be swept along by the current of culture. You're going to be easily distracted and you're going to live a less than impactful life. And at the end of all of it, there's a good reminder in the Psalms. It says, unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain, which is something like be bold and audacious, have this big vision and put a plan in place to accomplish it, but also stay humble because at the end of all of it, we are small and finite. And I would actually argue that unless we're actually living our life for something greater than just the here and now, then you can get people to Mars, but without some transcendent meaning, then what have you really accomplished? So speaking of a failure to launch, this week, Matthew McConaughey, who is in a movie called Failure to Launch, if you're not connecting those dots, Matthew McConaughey put on this giant event called The Art of Living. Not living, because that would not be very McConaughey of him, Livin apostrophe. I love Matthew McConaughey. I watched a lot of this. To be completely transparent, I did not watch all of it. I think I watched all of McConaughey's speech, but The Art of Living was streamed to over 2 million people, as reported by Matthew McConaughey at the beginning of the broadcast. It was produced at a super high level. You could get a link and like be there in the Zoom audience, or you could just stream it on YouTube. I looked this morning. It's actually been pulled off of YouTube. So I guess the stream was just up for a limited amount of time. But he was joined by some of like the top self-help gurus, including Tony Robbins, who is like the biggest self-help guy maybe ever in the history of the world. And it was really interesting. It was very well done in some sense. Matthew McConaughey was on like McConaughey level 10. Okay. He's always like, all right, all right, all right. But this one was like literally the intro was him playing his bongos, right? So it was McConaughey level 1 million, which is exactly what you would want out of Matthew McConaughey. And he's kind of become this like stoic Austin philosopher, and he has a lot of videos that he puts out with these self-help tidbits. And I read his book Green Lights, and I actually listened to it on Audible, and it's read by him. It's really enjoyable. It's a good book, and he talks in there about his faith and the church that he attends. And so I know that he has a spiritual background to this, but self-help always just falls short. It doesn't address the deepest needs that we actually have. And there are some people who are kind of in their feelings about this event. It was really cool. And if you listen to the whole thing, it would be very helpful for you because these are smart guys who have a lot of wisdom. And whether or not they directly address it, they are pulling from ancient wisdom and packaging it in a way that you can apply it to your life in some real sense. And some people felt like the whole thing was kind of an advertisement because towards the end of McConaughey's piece, then it was like, and you can buy this, package, and then you can really learn how to live. And it's normally $4,000, but today we'll give it to you for only $400. And so some people kind of felt like they were bamboozled, and the whole thing was just like a 3-hour marketing campaign. But this thing was everywhere and all over social media. McConaughey was like rhyming, and I couldn't get on Instagram. I couldn't get on Twitter without getting an advertisement for The Art of Living. And it was McConaughey giving like his McConaugheyisms, it's like my friends Rascal Flatts say, life is a highway and I'm going to ride it all night, all night, all night, like some kind of McConaughey-ism, right? And he got a lot of people to it, and it was really good. And I do think it was good, and I got a lot out of it. But at the same time, I couldn't fight just this reality that it doesn't go deep enough. At the very beginning of it, if you watched it, Matthew McConaughey asked some really pointed questions like, why are we here? Like, not why are we on this live stream, but why are we on planet Earth? Like, what are we doing here? What is our purpose? How do we advance in life? And those are all questions that can't be answered just through the lens of self-help. because those are questions that require a transcendent grounding. Why are we here? Well, we're here for purpose. Any good self-help person will tell you that you got to discover your purpose. But why? Why is living a life of purpose better than living a life of non-purpose? And you can't really answer that without pointing to some kind of transcendent grounding. We are here to advance, but how is advancement measured? Uh, the problem of self-help, when removed from a transcendent grounding, is it leads almost inevitably to some form of narcissism. And this is like just kind of by nature of self-help, because it forces you to look at yourself and to spend all of your time focused on yourself. And there is time for that. And even in MetaChurch, I mean, we have one of our most powerful programs, which is to help you look at the story of your life. However, with the transcendent grounding, the purpose of looking at your life is to understand all of the things that are keeping you stuck or leading you astray, so that you can come to terms with those, redeem those, and then point your life outwards towards the help of other people, like every single moment of every day. And often what you get in self-help is it ends up very selfish. As a matter of fact, one of the key points of the art of living is to be more selfish. And I know what he was meaning by it, but it's just bad advice. Because part of why is because as a preacher, I know this. You're going to say what you mean, and then people are just going to hear what they want. So when you say be more selfish, whatever you say after that could just be thrown out the window. And it was like, be more selfish, think more about your legacy, think more about what you're doing, think more about your impact. And by being selfish, you'll actually be more selfless. The problem is when you're just focused on self, it does lead to narcissism. And this has been shown psychologically. Jordan Peterson talks a lot about these studies where thinking about yourself is like the exact same thing neurologically and psychologically as being miserable. Selfishness is like exactly equivalent to misery. And it just spirals into anxiety and spirals into depression because we weren't meant to just think about ourselves all of the time. And yet, we do need to work on our life and we do need to be challenged. And so I think like the best place to go for this is the ancient wisdom of scripture. And you'll see this all the time. It's pointing you at yourself and it's pointing you at the things that you're doing or not doing, but then it's always pointing your life out. I had a mentor who would talk about the difference between centrifugal force and centripetal force. Centrifugal force, you could tell I'm a scientist because I don't even know how to say these words. Centrifugal force is where something moves inwards, it spirals in on itself like the flushing of a toilet. That is centrifugal force, I think. If you're a scientist and I'm wrong, then just switch these in your mind and still get the point. Centripetal force is where something moves out and out and out. It's always pointed out. And the problem with self-help is it often creates this centrifugal uh, oh man, I've been off more than I could chew here. A centrifugal force where all that you are and all of your thoughts and all of your emotions are just focused inwards and they're spiraling down deeper and deeper into you and deeper into narcissism. And what scripture does is it addresses you and it addresses your deepest needs and it addresses your deepest desires and it addresses your false narratives and it addresses your worst pain, but it takes all of that at a central point and it starts moving it centripetally outwards and outwards and outwards and uses your life to go out. And the more that you take who you are and the discovering of your purpose and the bettering of your worst ways and use it for the people outside of you, then you will actually experience the significance that you're looking for. Philippians 2, 3, and 4, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourself." This is the way to live. This is the way to experience the wholeness and the fulfillment and the impact that we're also desperately wanting in our life. Verse 4 says, everyone should look not to his own interests, but rather to the interests of others. This is like completely different than what our self-help world will tell us. Um, self-help tells you you should love yourself. And there is a place for that. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. Um, and a lot of us, we're so disgusted by ourselves, and we're so disgusted because we know ourselves better than anyone else knows us. And we know how far we have fallen short of our potential. And we know all of our worst ways. And we know how toxic our thoughts can get. And so, yes, like some of us need to realize that we have value, but our value does not come from looking inside. Our value comes from looking at something transcendent. And in the Christian faith, our value comes from looking at a God who loved us enough to put skin in the game, literally come to this earth and die on a cross in our place to show us in like blinding neon sign that we are valuable. We're so valuable that our God was willing to give up his life for us. In Luke 9, Jesus is talking. He said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Sounds very different than the self-help mantras of today. Deny yourself. Self-help is often like, what is your deepest desire? What are your deepest attractions? What are your deepest dreams? And this is more like, what are the dreams for your life that can make a difference for everyone? What is something you could give your life to that would be bigger than yourself? Deny yourself. And in the pursuit of denying yourself of your base passions, denying yourself of the parts of you that just want and can never be fulfilled, you will actually find fulfillment that you can't even imagine. But yet, again, this is very different. Christ's call to the art of living, it isn't like go and be selfish and find your own way. And let me be really clear, that's not what Matthew McConaughey's thing said. That was like one piece of it that I'm pulling out. So let me be fair to that. It was really good, and I actually think you would probably enjoy watching it. I do just find it interesting that the call of the gospel is not the art of living. It's more like the art of dying. How do you die to yourself? How do you wake up every day instead of this centrifugal force just kind of flushing your life away? You actually just aim your life out towards helping other people. You take all that you are, and even your baggage and even your pain, and you find a way to serve others with it. This is what Paul wrote to the church in Rome. And Rome is like kind of a good stand-in for the West today because it was very advanced and it was very prosperous. He says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. And those two words that he wrote in the original Greek, it's like your very obvious duty. Giving up of yourself, sacrificing of yourself is your very obvious duty. He goes on to say, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. So how do you help yourself? You allow God to renew your mind, to give you a fresh vision, to give you a fresh picture of life. You know what we talked about earlier, these big audacious goals, this vision to line your life up to? You need that. And you need to unify all of those lead measures, all of those check boxes towards that end of what you want to do. And you want to be bold and go public with it. But at the same time, if you really want to experience something, then you have to realize unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Line your life up to something that's not just big and audacious and impactful, but that has transcendent bearing beyond this life and into eternity. And he says, let your mind be transformed that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, the good, acceptable, and perfect will. And this is where I just think self-help falls short because there's no way to test it. And you could listen to the entire art of living and you could get your life all lined up and you could get your life all right, all right, all right. And you could have all the McConaughey-isms. But how do you test it? There were 2 million people watching. So it's like, what is your purpose? And how are you going to be selfishly selfless? And what's like, how do you know that the purpose you put in place for your life is good or helpful or going to lead to the flourishing of your family or going to make your marriage better or going to make your life better? How do you test it? And the answer is you test it against something transcendent, against the ancient wisdom that has been handed down to us in scripture that has led to the flourishing of families and the flourishing of life for like all of time, and especially the last 2,000 years after Jesus came and embodied those teachings and showed us how to live them out. Last, we are going to look at this incredible survey that went out by the Wall Street Journal. It was done by the National Opinion Research Center out of the University of Chicago. This is like a very legit poll that went out. Lots and lots of people answered. And what they were measuring was how happy people are. And here's what they found. They found that 30% of people rated themselves at the lowest level of happiness. And so again, this wasn't like this wasn't a poll from miserable and depressed to very happy. It was just measuring happiness. So the lowest level of happiness is the lowest thing you could answer on this poll, which was not too happy. Don't like how life is going. Like pretty hopeless, pretty helpless, pretty despondent. A majority of people, so that was 30%, a majority of people, 56% said they're pretty happy. They've got good days and bad days. It fluctuates. We know a little bit about how polling works, which is people usually answer like maybe a little bit more optimistically than they actually are. And so some percentage of that 56 could probably fall into the 30%. However, when it came to very happy, which is the highest level, that was only 12%. 12% of Americans say they are very happy. And I think that 12% is quite trustworthy, because you got to know what you're saying to mark yourself as very happy. The people who kind of split the middle, the 56%, they probably lean a little bit one way or the other and probably towards not as happy. Because if they were very happy, you know it, man. You know if you're living a very happy life. You know if you are fulfilled. And these numbers have dropped really drastically. Like they have sank by like double in the past 6 years. And so people are getting less and less and less and less happy. And it's really interesting because we point out a lot of things, but the one thing that we normally don't talk about in the conversations culturally are the actual cultural issues, like people's worldview and how they view things and how families are faring. And so here are some interesting things that they found about the very small number, the 12% of people who are very, very happy. Number one, 2/3 highly value marriage. Um, Less than 50% of unhappy people have that same value. So the people who are like only pretty happy or not happy at all, um, almost a majority of them do not view marriage highly. And that is the way our culture is going. Is marriage is seen as like the worst contract that you can sign, and it's a terrible arrangement, and you're just signing up to only be able to have sex with one person for the rest of your life. And why would you do that? And people aren't even wired to do that. Men aren't even wired to do that. Men are wired to be polyamorous, and so why would they lock themselves down? And women like lose all their control, and it's a terrible bargain for women, and it's a terrible bargain for men because if it ends, then she'll take half of your stuff, or if you're a woman and you're a high earner, he might take half of your stuff, and people are just moving away from the idea of marriage altogether, and less people are getting married, and yet 2/3 of the people who are highly, highly happy, very happy with their life, they highly value the idea of marriage, even if they're not married themselves. 67% highly value marriage. 2/3 strongly believe in God. It's like central to their life. Again, what do we see in our culture? We are moving into a post Christian and now a pre pagan nation. So we've moved away from God. And now, like, the people who are the butt of the jokes are people who still believe in God, who believe in some sky daddy up there, some fairy in the sky who's granting our magical wishes or whatever. It's seen as ludicrous. And so everyone's moving away from that. And yet, 2/3, this huge majority of people who are very happy, have God as the central orienting factor of their life. One other thing that they found in the very happy people is that the majority are content with their finances. They don't have this huge like longing for and lust after material possessions and money, and that was not correlated to wealth. It's not like these people who are very happy are all wealthy. As a matter of fact, whether or not you're very happy or not happy at all wasn't correlated to your income or to your net worth. And so not only that, but you might think, well, okay, so they're married and they like marriage and they like God, and they don't care too much about money, but they maybe have just had it easier in life. And the study found that's not the case at all either, that a huge number of the people who said they were very happy are like right now going through very, very difficult things, very difficult health problems, very difficult problems in their family, going through, all of the tension and things that would cause most people to be very unhappy. And so it wasn't correlated to wealth, it wasn't correlated to net worth, it wasn't correlated to whether or not the sun was shining and butterflies floating every day in their life was just perfect, like some fairy tale. No. What it was correlated to was a high view and value on marriage, a high view and value of God, and a low value on material possessions and money. And so not getting married, to go back to McConaughey, can be called a failure to launch. That's what that whole movie was about, is he's trying to live this single bachelor life, and it's a rom-com, so he falls in love and he does the whole thing. But this is just ancient wisdom. Cultural issues, which is we're more depressed and we're more anxious and we're more suicidal and we're more lonely. Statistically, we're moving the wrong way in every single direction. And this very legitimate research center finds that the very happy people in life, what do? They get married and highly value marriage. They have a strong belief in God, and they put a low value on material possessions. Well, let's see what scripture has to say about that. In Genesis 2, at the very beginning of things, the man said, "This one at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. This person belongs to me. This one will be called woman. I belong to her, for she was taken from man." And this is why a man leaves his father and mother and bonds with his wife, and they become one. Mutuality. Faithful, monogamous, loving marriage. This was designed from the very beginning to be co-equals, to be, you might have heard at the very beginning of Genesis that Eve, the woman, is called the helpmate. In the Hebrew, that literally means a helpful adversary, someone to challenge you, to help you grow, to lovingly correct you, to come alongside of you. This is a high view, and all of Scripture has like the highest view of marriage that you can have. As a matter of fact, marriage is the very metaphor that is used for Jesus, the groom, and his bride, his church, the people who are a part of the movement of Jesus. In Psalm 144 and all throughout Scripture, happy are the people. Happy. This is what the University of Chicago was measuring. Who's very happy? Happy are the people whose God is the Lord. I mean, this is just right back to ancient wisdom. Here's what about money in Ecclesiastes 5:10. The one who loves silver is never satisfied with silver, and whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with income. This too is futile. The one who loves silver, the one who has this high value on money and material possessions, whoever loves wealth, it says they will never be satisfied. And that's what we find, because when you don't have this clear view of how life works, and when you don't have a transcendent grounding for your life, and when you don't have a purpose outside of the purposes that culture gives you, then you will always live for what's next, and you will always live for more, and more will never be enough, and money will never make you content. And when you finally get the raise, and you finally double your salary, and you finally triple your salary, and you live in the bigger house, and you drive the newer car, it still will not satisfy you. Not getting married, having this low view of marriage and just thinking it is this arcane, terrible, patriarchal institution. Good luck with that, because statistically, you're putting yourself in a position to be less and less happy. Many of the very happy people, very happy, are going through real struggles and real suffering, but they have hope outside of the hope that is offered in this world, the fleeting, non-transcendent hope. Spirituality and marriage, they give a sense of belonging, and they give a sense of purpose. And then an emphasis on God in your life takes the emphasis off of money and material possessions. We are, to quote an ancient story, we are all living with King Midas syndrome. We want everything we touch to turn to gold. And you have to remember that the Midas touch was a curse, not a blessing. And if you don't have a high value on relationship and a high value on marriage, then you can get all of the gold and silver in the world. If you don't have something outside of you that you're living for, some kind of hope for life after life, something transcendent to ground your life, then the worst thing that could happen to you is everything you touch could turn to gold. You remember the story of King Midas, and he was met by one of the, I guess, Greek gods, and he wished to have the Midas touch. Everything he touched turned to gold. And pretty soon he learned he couldn't eat, because everything he grabbed to try to eat would turn to gold. And he was so depressed that his daughter came and hugged him. She turned to gold, and he lost relationship. This is what happens. This is what Ecclesiastes is warning about. And this is what, as we become more affluent in the West, this is exactly what we are experiencing. And so you can stop doing these three things and live a happier life. You can stop running away from marriage. And if you're already married, you can put a higher and higher value on your marriage, where it is now in second place only to your relationship with God. For so many people, they come, and I'm a pastor, and I help a lot of people who are struggling in their marriages. And what I find almost every single time is their marriage just is not the priority. Their hobby is the priority. Their friends are the priority. Their work is the priority. You should have the highest view of marriage possible, because God had the highest view of marriage. Stop living with the culture's pre-pagan worldview. This idea that all that there is what we can see and touch and feel and explore and see under a microscope, that there's nothing transcendent, this materialist, humanist, atheistic worldview that is leading to nihilism and misery. And stop finding your value in money and possessions. You stop doing those three things, and you will begin to live a much, much better life. And one more thing. I want to talk about strengths and weaknesses and the very thin line that divides those two things. You've maybe heard that your strengths are just the other side of the coin of your weaknesses. And maybe you've even seen that play out in your life in different ways. Like maybe you're very verbose, you know how to use your words, and it's a real strength for you because you can cast a strong vision. But at the same time, it can be your greatest downfall because you also use your communication skills to manipulate or to cut people down or to hurt people or make people feel smaller so that you can feel bigger. Maybe your intelligence is like your greatest strength, but you don't always use that for good. In fact, you use it for ill gains. Like this is the case for all of us. But how are they so close? And why do they function like these two sides of the same coin? And why is there such a thin line between our strengths and our weaknesses? And there's an actual reason for this. And you can understand it by understanding story. And this is something that we use a lot at MetaChurch. We have a program where we take people through this wonderful process called Historia. It was developed by some friends of mine. And their model is not new. In fact, it goes back to the 16th century and a guy named Gustav Freytag who put together Freytag's pyramid or the narrative arc. And this is how you understand like the hero's journey. The hero is someone who has some kind of interruption in their life, some kind of inciting incident that leads them out onto the journey of their life. So you can think about Luke Skywalker, and he has this inciting incident where he goes back to his uncle and aunt's house, and it's been like ransacked and they've been killed. And that's his inciting incident. It takes him on this crazy adventure that goes all the way across Star Wars 7, 8, and 9 and beyond, apparently. Everyone has this, and your inciting incident in your life was whatever happened to you when you were really young that took away your innocence or made you realize that the world can be a bad place or a dangerous place or people aren't always safe. And in that moment, you experience very real pain. And I talked about this in my one-on-one conversation with John Whitty a little ways back on the podcast. And I want to revisit it specifically through this idea of our strengths and weaknesses, because maybe the first question we should ask is, where do our strengths and weaknesses come from? And the answer is they come from the primary pain in our life. And that primary pain happened to you young. It happened to you almost exclusively before 10 years old. And it might have happened so young that you don't really remember it. And out of this pain, you almost always develop first your weaknesses. You develop fear. You develop an inner narrative, a broken, false inner narrative about who you are or how the world works. False narratives are like, I'll never be good enough. Nobody could ever love me. I'm stupid. I can't trust anybody. I have to prove myself. There's all these false narratives that like get in the driver's seat of your life. And if you don't do something very intentional to take back control, that false narrative will drive your life for the rest of time. And so what that false narrative and that primary pain do is they start building coping mechanisms into your life. And so for some of you, that has turned into things like addiction. And over time, you developed addictive tendencies that turned into bigger addictions that sunk their teeth into your life. And that's what you go to try to alleviate your primary pain and quiet your inner false narrative. For some of you, it turned into things like multiple relationships. And so you've always had trouble maintaining faithfulness to a partner. You've struggled with things like pornography. You try to find your self-worth or value, try to ease that pain, ease that false narrative through lots of relationships, maybe manipulating other people, stringing lots of people along, keeping people at a distance, closing people off. It takes all these relational forms. And then it can also look like achievement. And this is the most difficult one to pinpoint because that is a real strength in your life, right? Like for some of you, your strength is in your ability to, have the right friend groups and manage people and get all of these addictive things into your life. And for some of you, you have all these relational skills where you know how to pick up women or you know how to lead men on. And for some of you, you just know how to achieve. You are a driver. You've been successful in every single thing that you do, but none of your success actually satisfies you because all you're trying to do is not live a life of purpose, but just satiate your pain and quiet your false inner narrative. And so this is how all of our weaknesses develop. They develop out of our pain. And this is how all of our strengths develop. They develop out of our ability to cope with our pain. And so, what determines whether or not all of the skill sets and coping mechanisms you have in your life are used as a strength, are used as a weakness, or to use the language of Historia, how do you know if on the hero's journey you're living as a villain or you're living as a victim, both of which are when you're operating in your weaknesses, or whether you are using all of what you've been through to live as a hero? And the answer goes back to what we've been discussing all throughout the podcast, which is, where is your life aimed? Because if you're a villain, then you are centrifugally, not a scientist, pointing inward. Everything is about you, your own influence, your own money, your own relationships, your sexual pleasure, your high. It's all about you. And if you're a manipulator, then you're going to make everyone feel like it's about them. But in those moments when you're quiet and restless and having to be honest, it is about you. And so you're a villain. And if you're a victim, then it's all about you. And you guilt people and you make people feel bad and nothing's ever your fault and you're always the martyr and no one ever understands how hard you work. And it's all about you, the attention on you, the time on you, your feelings, your emotions. Heroes, what you do as a hero is you come to terms with the pain in your life, the pain that is driving your actions, the false narrative that has come out of that pain, that is sitting at the driver's seat of your life and making all of your decisions for you. You come to terms with that. You kick your false narrative out of the driver's seat. You come to terms with your pain. You forgive the people who caused that pain in your life, which is hard as hell to do, to actually forgive them, because they probably don't deserve your forgiveness, which is kind of the definition of forgiveness. And they probably wouldn't even receive it if you gave it to them. And maybe they don't even know that they hurt you. You forgive the people who caused that pain. You kick your false narrative out of the driver's seat. This is much easier said than done. And then you take your life with all of that pain and the strengths that were built through your coping mechanisms and you point them out. And you begin to live giving your life away for the betterment of other people. You get a big, giant vision for your life and you put the steps in place and you work harder than anyone else will work and you're willing to go public with it and you're willing to be humiliated in your failures because you're giving your life away for other people. You quit living like the world is living. You stop putting all of your emphasis on money and material goods and influence and all of the things that the world tries to dangle in front of you to distract you. You start valuing a transcendent purpose for your life. You start valuing your relationships and you give your life away and you use your strengths for the betterment of other people. You deny yourself, you take up your cross, you're willing to suffer for the betterment of other people. This isn't about narcissistic self-help. This isn't about the art of living. This is the art of dying to yourself, dying to your own selfishness, dying to being a victim, dying to being a villain, and beginning to live as a hero. And if you can do that, and when you do that, you will start experiencing a quality of life that you can't even imagine. This has been episode 15 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. I am so glad to be back, to be doing this, be getting it in front of you guys. I'm thankful for everyone who is listening. Let me remind you, subscribe to the channel. We've got a button like right here. You can subscribe, check out other videos, hit the like button, put some comments down, share this with other people, get the algorithm working, and we will see you next week on the Clayton Tyner podcast.